we can correct. I want to invite everyone to use the session to ask the questions, to interact with Ntate Thaba. I mean, this is our very own. I know he's on TEDx and all, but he's our very own before he's on those platforms. So please interact with him. Ask him what you want to know. And let's not make it just one facilitated session, but one where we know we are adding value. Ask the tough questions as well. We do have the capacity, even amongst the audience, to sort of answer this question. So it's a very round table, Ntate Thaba. It's not only for you, and we will also ask, and some of the techniques that not only challenge, but question. We are allowed to do that because we want to learn. I hope you guys have your notebooks. I hope you have your pens. Today is one where we are going to take a lot of notes. And also I'm inviting everybody that speaks publicly to add on the notes as we go through these techniques, as we go through the learnings or whatever he's sharing. If you have anything to add, I don't want us to subtract, but if you have anything to add, let's add to it tonight. So Ntate Thaba, welcome. The floor.
Thank you.
The floor is yours. And yeah, you can take us through how tonight will look like. I feel like tonight I'm in the chats. It's me in the chats. It's me at the background. You just let me know when you need me. Here to support, but also just here to learn as well with everybody.
It sounds like thank you, Melis. I appreciate it. It's a lot of pressure, but actually I'm excited about it. It's a discussion we had last year, thinking about all things public speaking. In fact, that's how I connected with Lizzie in the early days. We had been running a number of sessions from a public speaking standpoint. Myself, Melizzi, and Tate Harold initially, and now Tate Lebo as well. And that was just coming together to try and improve, as everyone was doing during COVID. You might remember, people spawned, or COVID spawned new YouTube channels. People were welcoming us to their channels. If I wasn't welcoming you to my channel, it was like, what are you doing in your house alone during lockdown? You were missing out big time. So that was the dynamic during COVID. And so we embarked on a journey to try and grow and get better from a public speaking standpoint. And so it's an area that I'm passionate about. And I know a lot of people here are passionate about. You have learned something around it, you have done a lot about it, and you are perhaps even trying to improve certain aspects and dimensions of it. And for me in particular, it is something I'm very intentional about continuously developing and getting better around. So as Lizzie said, I want today to be a lot more engaging. If I start speaking the theory of public speaking, it will quickly become boring, but also it will be a lot to digest. But so maybe before going into many dynamics, when speaking about public speaking and doing presentations, there are a variety of perspectives many people have around it. Many people would immediately think about, for example, being a motivational speaker, being a keynote speaker. And so you already miss out in terms of identifying a lot of other aspects in which we are public speakers. If you are the one who speaks Kochorong, that is public speaking, right? If you are the family meeting chair in your home when December has dawned upon the masses and you are the one who coordinates the discussions, that is public speaking. And so you start realizing there are many times and many instances where we engage with public speaking, but we might just not be as intentional about it. Now, why it is important to think about public speaking from that standpoint and to identify it and therefore be deliberate about how we use those moments and those opportunities, those platforms, is then we can do it better. I see public speaking as the art of convincing people to keep their attention on you, right? Oftentimes, you naturally get some sort of an attention. So Lizzie introduced me here and said, we've been waiting for the session, amping everybody up. So I have an immediate attention and a spotlight that is cast on me. But the challenge I have is to keep it here, right? Otherwise, that leave button, you can see it. Some of you are already glancing. Or you see, I see that leave button. Let me give him 2 minutes, Inyana. If he's not going anywhere useful, I am exiting this meeting. And that is the reality, especially in the day and age we live in. Someone is on his phone or her phone whilst on a computer, whilst a child is running around someone else in their house. Someone is hooting in the background. Someone is singing in your house. So there's a lot of things that demand attention. So when you are a public speaker, you are essentially competing for attention. And so for me, I see it as one of the ways in which I look at it is the art of constantly convincing people to keep and retain their attention on me when I communicate something. And that's why it's important to identify and understand the context in which you are working, serving, and functioning as a public speaker. Now, before I go into some of the theory, some of the things that are helpful, some of the things that are tips that would be useful for you and I to deploy, to work on, to develop, I want to start off first and foremost with questions. I realize that if I go into the details here, we will never finish and will in fact run out of time. So to avoid that impending reality, I want to start first with questions. When you heard that there's this public speaking master class, what were some of those very pressing questions that immediately came to your mind? Was it, I've in fact wanted to be a public speaker. I wanted to be a motivational speaker, but I've not quite done it. I have felt that I can speak better at work meetings, but I haven't done anything about it. So maybe I could glean a thing or two from this session. Or someone has actually even given you that advice to say, Katlego, you know what, just maybe try and see how you can improve your public speaking because you're climbing the ranks in our organization. This is an area that will help you to be a lot more effective and influential and persuasive. So I'm going to pause there and then perhaps invite questions. And you're most welcome to unmute, and I know I might be complicating things for Melizzi, or raise your hand, and then Melizzi can unmute you as you ask a question that you've had. And we'll address a few of those and then get into some of the details about public speaking from a theoretical, semi-theoretical, into practical standpoint. Cool, let me pause there. Welcome, Bongani.
I'm
Welcome,
ready.
Diana.
I'm ready to unmute those that want to speak. I'm also ready to check on the chat questions that people have before we go into it.
Okay, maybe people are still shy. Someone must break the ice. Maybe to break the ice, I'll tell a story. So as I tell the story, please be thinking about your questions, okay? So how did I get into public speaking? I grew up in a rural village called Mamaholo and the township next to it called Lebahom. When I was in primary school, there was a competition for public speaking. And I learned and picked up English later than my peers in primary school. There were a lot of contributing factors, but one of which was that we didn't have a well-functioning television. So I wouldn't necessarily watch a lot of programs on television that would have helped my development, perhaps, in speaking English, which I found there was quite a disparity between me and my peers when I was in primary school. So these are the early years when I was still in primary school, grade 1, 2, 3, 4, thereabout. And so it actually developed into a fear that I might not even be able to speak specifically here. I'm referring to English, that I just couldn't communicate like the other kids could. They seemed to know words I didn't. They were comfortable communicating, expressing themselves in the English language. And so it was essentially becoming a bit of a fear for me that I might never be able to even speak in English. So I started challenging myself and pushing into that fear. And so when I was in grade 7, I decided to participate in a school public speaking competition. It was a debate competition. Our school was debating another school from another area. And I worked hard to charge myself up and get into this competition. And it was 5 learners per school. I debated my heart out, and then the result came out. And you can imagine when you debate your heart out, you know that it's inevitable. I mean, the trophy must come home. But I wasn't the first, and I did not occupy any position from second to 9. I was dead last. I was the 10th worst, even best performer, however you want to push it or put it. So I was dead last. And I remember to this day that feeling of saying, how bad am I in this thing? But even in that experience and that reality where I failed dismally, I saw it as an opportunity to get better. I saw it as an opportunity to charge myself up and get myself into a space where I can just grow and get better. And the more I tried to get better, the more I grew, it became a lot more impactful. It became a lot more effective. I intentionally, when I was now in high school, participated in even more debates, right? The stuff that I was failing dismally in. And that's actually how I started improving. And that's one of the tips that I'm going to give you. Maybe I might as well state it now around the importance of practice. Have a platform, a setup, a situation that exposes you to public speaking and that you can use to be intentional about your public speaking. Many people might already have such a setting, but they don't identify it as a platform for themselves to get better at public speaking. So they don't utilize it fully. For example, you might be a teacher, and teaching actually gives you an opportunity to do public speaking on a day-to-day basis. How you present the material to your learners. You might be a lecturer. How you present the material to your students allows you room to be creative, allows you to be intentional, allows you to use examples, stories, anecdotes. And that brings in an aspect of you growing as a speaker. And the more of that you do, the better you really get at communicating your message, retaining and convincing people to retain their attention on you, and you can get better and better. And when you learn that skill, it applies in other contexts. You might have learned it in a teaching setup, in a lecturing setup, but you find that it actually becomes applicable even when you get into the workplace, even when you get into a wedding ceremony setup and you have to give a speech. And so that's maybe me helping to break the ice. Let me see if there are people who have specific questions. Otherwise, I will fire right away and get into a lot of material and content that hopefully will help you as far as public speaking is concerned. So what are some of maybe the questions some people might have here and interests you might have as far as public speaking is concerned?
So far, we need a lot of practice, and use the platform. Oh, there's a hand.
Yeah. Kaiser.
Thaba, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, sir?
Thank you. So one question I have, I think you've touched on it a little bit, but if you can just delve a little deeper into just overcoming the fear, of having like a million eyes on you, being the center of that attention. Public speaking may not be something that people do on a day-to-day basis. You've shared some examples of people who find themselves in a teaching role, so they get to practice that, whether they're aware of that or not. But to an ordinary person that, doesn't have those kind of a role, what are some of the things that they can look at or some of the avenues that they can tap into? But more importantly, like, how do you get over that fear? Practice,
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
But I think there might be a little more into that.
Yes, that's a brilliant question. Thank you so much for that, Kaiser. And it is a multifaceted answer to it. As you're saying that, I'm remembering as part of my answer to the question that the reality of it is that you learn to be comfortable with that, I'd call it fear for now, that anxiety. Am I going to do well? Because everyone wants to do well. I would rather fail an exam dismally where I'm the only person who knows I failed it, right? The problem with public speaking is the moment you fail, we all know, right, that you failed. And that's where really the fear sparks from. You are performing in front of people. You're wondering if there's someone who's a better expert than you, if someone is going to question what you're presenting. And so that is oftentimes the root of that feeling. But there are certain things that you can do that help you deal better with it. One of them, why practice is important, is practice, because through practice, you realize a few things. One of them is that feeling remains there when you do well, even when you don't do well. So it actually has nothing to do with whether you're going to do well or not. And so you start getting to a point where you realize that that's part and parcel of being a public speaker. And actually it gets better. And then you start learning certain things that actually people want you as a public speaker to do well, right? So you start realizing that actually it's highly unlikely. If you have an audience of 100 people, look, if you have 2 people who want you to fail dismally, that will be a shocking reality. People in general don't want someone to fail spectacularly in front of their eyes. We may be frustrated with Bafana when they lose, but deep down, we want them to do well, right? That's the reality. Like, we'll call them a bunch of losers, but when they win, you will see that that's what we really wanted. So the truth is, the majority, if not all people, when you go onto the stage, want you to do well. None of us, most of us, cringe and actually feel like, we want someone to recover when we see they're struggling with something and they have hit a stumbling block in their presentation. We don't want someone to humiliate themselves in front of us because it feels like I'm in their shoes and feeling what they are feeling when they are struggling and everyone is looking at them. And so for me, that is actually a very liberating thing. I will make mistakes on stage. I'll make mistakes on a platform, but I know that people want me to do well. And then secondly, most times I'm the best prepared person on the topic and the subject matter that I'm speaking about. What does that mean? It means, one, even though there may be many people who are in the field of the topic, for the packaging and the context and the setup of that topic that has been put forward, I'm at that point most likely the best prepared person. I was able to get the statistics. I was able to layer the arguments and the thinking more than even that person. So even though I might not be a doctor in philosophy and all I have is an undergrad, but just because I sat down to put together a presentation and prepare for it, I can lean on other professors, on other doctors of philosophy on that topic, and then bring that into my talk and into my presentation. And that means oftentimes you are the best prepared person to speak on that topic, on that night, on that day, right? The second thing is that nobody knows how you planned your speech, okay? So when you mess up, they have no cooking clue. When you forget the line, they don't know that you forgot a line. When you forget an entire part of the body of your presentation, they have no idea, all right? And that means you can just swivel, you can just pivot and act like nothing happened because nobody knows. And for me, that is the most liberating thing. And so that's part of why when I prepare a lot of my talks, I don't write out the full speech. I actually more prepare sections of the speech. I will know the key aspects of my speech, the key outline, the main message, and I might rehearse a few lines here and there that hit home or that help me to drive home the message. But the rest of it, I flow with it. It's fluid because nobody knows what I've written down. Even if I write it down, I can jump from story 2 to story 7 because I forgot about story 3 and 4. If at that time I remember story 7, I jump into story 7 because people do not have that knowledge. And so that's another thing that is very helpful. But I think over and above that, it is important to know why I started with that point of we all have it by and large, is that I think there was a study done in America where they ranked public speaking as the number one fear that most Americans had. Second to it was death. So people would rather die than give the talk, right? So just to put it bluntly. And that is quite telling around the extent to which people are afraid of it. And why it is also liberating is that you are not alone. You are not the only person that has that hesitancy. But when you break through, it opens up a world for you, for the people who would listen to what you are saying. And so it becomes something that actually, once you've done something well, when you have given a talk well, celebrated, stand at the end of that talk and say, well, actually, it wasn't as bad as I thought, and start using more and more of those experiences to encourage you for the next talk. So because I've done it so many times, I've been in that moment where I was anxious. How are people going to receive me? So many times that now I know how I generally, if not always, feel after the talk. And 90% plus of the time, I feel good. It has gone well, right? And it helps you when you go into new contexts. And as much as I've done a lot of public speaking, there are certain times where you realize the stakes are high. I mean, it's like the cow is flying. Yeah, the stake is really high. Okay. So, for example, I had to be speaking on live television on behalf of our firm. And it's a global firm. Our services are consulting. People need to believe that I'm an expert when they come to me and I am giving them advisory services in our space. Now, when I'm going onto a television interview, if I mess up and they come with a question that dribbles me like Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi, that thing is recorded and etched in history, right? My clients are going to see it. They'll be like, hey, this is that guy who couldn't answer this question, okay? And so you can feel that the stakes are high and the pressure is heightened. And so in as much as I've done a lot of public speaking, for those sort of moments, and because of the size of the audience being on a national audience, for example, in some of those cases when I was speaking, it just increases the intensity of that pressure, sometimes even to be consistent or comparable with someone who might be stepping out for the first time. But what do I rely on? I rely on the same old, same old. I've done this before. I've learned skills, even in a setup where it was not on television, that will translate into television. I've learned to find a way to give you an answer, even in a tricky situation that doesn't make me look like a fool, because I've done it so many times. And sometimes I failed in earlier stages, but I got it better. And because I've done it more and more times, that's why the practice component is so critical as far as public speaking is concerned. So I have dwelled a lot more on that question that you gave, Kaiser, because I find and believe is a limitation for many people. But what you end up having, it's like you're going onto a fight and you know that your adversary is potent. And this is not an easy adversary. Your rival is going to fight back, is going to punch back. But what practice becomes is you start knowing your methods of defense and your methods of attack. And more as you get into more battles, you have acquired skills, you have acquired and built up, sharpened the right tools and objects to fight better, to be more effective with your strikes. And so that's what the practice environment does for you. You start bringing in, for example, vocal variety. When you started, it was just monotone, everything was the same. I'm speaking to you, it's the same. I add 1, 2 vocal variety. Sometimes I give you a lot more emphasis on the point. Sometimes I'm just going to land it softly because it deserves a subtle landing. And it is a sensitive point that I want you to receive well. But sometimes I want to pump you up. And so I have to increase the tempo of how I deliver that message. You gotta be better. You must do your best nonetheless, because I must encourage you to do that. And that is vocal variety. And so that becomes one of the things that you have. And then another might be where you have learned to do impromptu speaking. And because you've done it in different contexts, you now have comfort to say, even if I'm asked a question about a random thing, I can make up something as a response. So I'll give you a tip on this, which I had on my notes. And that's why I think I like this question, because it allows me to delve into a lot of some of the things that I had prepared. But why I start with the practice component is that if you do not have a platform where you speak consistently, do note those platforms exist, and particularly if you're intentional about your public speaking. So one of those is a Toastmasters environment. I had been speaking for about 10 years before I joined the Toastmasters. I was already giving public talks. But why I went to Toastmasters was because I was intentional about certain tools that I wanted to add to my artillery as a public speaker. I went to one Toastmasters meeting, and at the end, this person makes an announcement And the announcement is to announce how many times each of the speakers who said something during that evening used filler words or crutch words and sounds, the arms. So, yeah. And then I was like, I can't remember. I was like in double digits. I was like, am I using these arms so excessively? And I was like, that is a good environment for me to go to learn to be uncomfortable with the extent to which I utilize these crutch words, filler sounds, so that I can get better. I had already built up other skills. I had already been in the public spaces, giving inspirational talks, etc. But I did not have this in my artillery. And so being in that context allowed me to improve on it. The second thing that I joined the club for, it was a Sentin Toastmasters club that I had joined at the time, was because they had an impromptu speaking section. And with the impromptu speaking, we get to the meeting, the Toastmasters evening, and then you're just given a topic there and you have to speak for 2 minutes on it. And so it trained one's muscle to be able to make up a story, make up facts, make up a talk about something that you just found out now. And we actually naturally do it. It is just that we need to learn to be comfortable to do it in a public setting. The third thing that I joined the club for was around humor, which is another point that I had in the discussion. Being a Toastmaster, you run the entire evening. And so you want to keep it engaging. You want to link up different parts of the evening. So what I found was that it allowed me room to exercise the muscle of humor. And so that was an important thing for me. And so being in that training space, the practice space, I was constantly developing. So I might take one more question, but I might also be reading some of the points, or if there's a question in the chat box. Maybe 5 more minutes, and then I'll go into some of my prepared notes. So Mtembeni said the first would be, is it for everybody? Does background count, exposure, etc., count? So it is for whoever wants to do it. In reality, most of us, if not all of us, can't choose and opt out of public speaking. And I need to be clearer here. So there are different types of public speaking. You might want to become a paid public speaker, whether as a keynote speaker in a particular area of expertise or in a particular field. That is not necessarily for everyone. It's for people who want to market themselves as such. You might be a motivational speaker. You might be a politician and you have to sell your ideas to the masses. That's a form of public speaking. But there are cases and types of public speaking that majority of us are going to be involved in. You will be asked during a wedding. So speak on behalf of the uncles, right? Or speak on behalf of the siblings. That is a form of public speaking. You might be at a graduation ceremony and you have to say something. It might be your own graduation ceremony and you have to say some words. And those are moments where you have an opportunity to say something that can be impactful for another person. Many of us oftentimes underestimate the value and the worth of what we have accumulated over time and how much of an impact it can have on the next person if we package it nicely and share it accordingly. Because we are always benchmarking relative to someone who's well known, who has received this accolade in the media, in the national landscape, etc., etc. But oftentimes we have an audience with people that allows us to be quite influential. And if we are intentional in those moments around how we convey messages, and sometimes maybe on a one-on-one basis, sometimes it might be with 10 learners, 10 students, it might be with family members at a family gathering, because you might see certain things that we do as a family that are not helping us, but you need to be able to communicate it in a manner that is persuasive and influential. And so I believe it is highly unlikely that you're going to find a person who is never in a setup where they're doing public speaking and where they could leverage and benefit from public speaking skills. So your backgrounds, your exposure, they do count, but they're not the it and be all. Ultimately, it's about being intentional, right? If I realize that in my background, I wasn't exposed to richness of vocabulary, it means then I must open the dictionary a lot more. If I realize that in my background, and maybe we are using the English language specifically here because public speaking is not about the language per se. It's just a one way in which it's expressed. I also do public speaking in my home language, Sepedi. But even if it is in, let's say, the English language, and you realize that you have struggled with learning the correct pronunciation of words, there are areas and things in the English language that can help you with that. So things like elocutions that focus on how you pronounce words correctly can be what you get into, and it helps you improve how you pronounce words and ensures people hear what you are actually saying versus hearing what they think you're saying. So although they count, you can improve in particular areas that are important. Now, I mentioned now that I went to Toastmasters with certain specific focus areas that I wanted to improve on, reduce the ums and the ers, have the platform to train up on humor and then around impromptu. Why it was important for me to do that is that even as you come onto a public speaking journey, we are at different levels of maturity. So you want to identify the key areas and the most significant aspects of public speaking that will move the dial for you in becoming a more effective speaker. And those things vary for all of us. And you want to have that assessment. Oftentimes you can get it through established speakers that might be in your circles, in environments like public speaking clubs. Toastmasters is just one example. It just then allows you to see, it's a form of stock take of where am I? And then it allows you to craft a picture of your future state. And for some of us, it might be that I need to gesture a bit more because when I speak, I'm like the Statue of Liberty, and I've never been to the US, right? But I become the Statue of Liberty. I never move. And then some of us, when we speak, we are too excessive, we're too frantic. It's like nothing stops, it's like a windmill. The hands are just constantly moving. And that in itself can become a distraction. And so then that might be my area. And for some of us, it might be around how we structure our talks. And so there are different areas that you can then focus on, hone in on, and deliberately improve on those rather than try to improve everything at the same time. Because when you identify the areas that are going to give you the biggest return, you're going to see significant improvement very, very quickly. It's like a sprinter. It's harder to go from 9.64 in 100 meters to 9.58 that Usain Bolt was doing than it is to come from 20 seconds for the 100 meters to maybe 15 seconds, right? And that's exactly what I'm speaking about here. Okay, I think my mind is quicker than my mouth, and I have never been able to practice and learn some skills on slowing down and keep up with my mind. It's worse that I'm an overthinker. So I'll respond to that as well. One of the important things that you want to get into your artillery as a public speaker is the use of pauses. If I get a moment, maybe if we have 10 minutes at the end or 5 minutes, I might just show you examples with clips, but pauses are very powerful. It's one of the ways that you replace the filler words and crutch words, the filler sounds, the ums and the ers. You just pause. But for the same reason that we tend to have a fear of public speaking, we tend to have a fear of being quiet in front of people that are just looking at me. Yet it's one of the most powerful things. When I had been giving speeches and talks in different settings and forums, one of the things that surprised me has been around the extent to which established, remarkable historical speakers use things like pauses. I had, for example, at one point in time, had to do a rendition of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I Have a Dream. And I was shocked as to how long he was pausing, because I actually was listening to that speech, pausing it, counting seconds. And at some point, he's pausing for 3 seconds. And when I tried to rehearse, I just couldn't get there. It just felt like forever, like to just say something and pause and then continue. It was so powerful and so liberating. And that is something that is essential. And there are areas and things in your speech that actually demand that you pause. And in fact, if you don't pause, it starts taking away from your speech. Let's say you're giving a very technical talk that has quite technical concepts, whether it's mathematical, scientific, whatever. People need to digest what you're saying so that they keep following. The moment people feel like you've lost them along the way, they get distracted easily because they just feel like they can't keep up. And so when you're giving those sort of talks, it becomes imperative and of paramount importance that you're intentional around including pauses. Just wait. Let people digest the issue. Sometimes they might even come back with a question to clarify, and it just enhances the quality of your speech. Cool. All right. Tembeni also brought about being able to accept positive criticism. I agree. And one of the points that I have is, so I'm going to mention them quickly. It's very interesting how you are all pulling out my notes through these questions. But one of the things that you want to do when you, especially if you want to become a keynote speaker, a public speaker of that type, and intentional in growing. And sometimes it is because you're becoming a leader in your business and you want to be intentional about growing. So one of the things that I say is where you are delivering prepared speeches, record the speeches when you actually give them. You will be surprised how much you learn about the quality of your speaking by reviewing that tape. You start realizing, geez, I speak so fast. Slow down, Katlego. Like, you start getting shocked. You're like, you. Even I can't hear what I'm saying. It's like the people who can't read their own handwriting. You start seeing those sort of things, and you're like, idea woman. So it becomes important that you reflect. So I had 3 points. Let me touch on those around some critical things as far as your public speaking is concerned. So one, do it regularly. So I think I've unpacked that quite fairly. That is around the practice. Might come back to it, but for now, that's the first one. The second one is do it intentionally. By doing it intentionally is identify those settings. You might already have settings, team meetings where you're giving updates, even on Teams, even on Zoom. That is a platform where you are giving a public speech, a public talk. You plan how you're going to deliver it, how you're going to retain people's attention, especially on Teams. The moment we put off that video, the tea, we are making tea there. We are zooming in on that game on TV. Like the distractions are many. So you need to find ways of retaining people's attention, right? And there are a variety of things that we will not finish today. But if I get to the points around how you prepare the setting, especially if you're going to do a keynote, make sure people can hear you. The moment people can't hear you, I don't care how good your talk is, they are just going to disconnect. So make sure there's enough sound. So for example, you might be told you're going to be speaking at a hall somewhere. Ask those questions. If it's a hall, they're expecting 2,000 people, but there's no microphone. Like, what do you think is going to happen? There are going to be many speakers and you will be just one of them. Okay? The audience will have their own speeches there and they will overcrowd you. So it's those little things that are very important around your speaking. So do it intentionally. Identify the settings in which you are speaking and say, okay, I am going to be giving this talk. What are the key messages that I want to bring out? When you start the talk, be intentional. This is the agenda that I want us to touch on. Give them the idea, signpost. It keeps them attentive. Someone realizes, oh yeah, that last point that you mentioned, I must stay on this call for because I actually want to know when I'm getting my salary increase as well. So, you're being strategic. You're being strategic around retaining attention. As I told you, it's about convincing people to keep their attention on you. Research, right? Study about public speaking. One of the aspects of researching is, I told you about Martin Luther King Jr. I follow, I listen to, and I study great public speakers in history and how they convey their messages. I mean, you look at, for example, someone like Jesus Christ in the Bible. I'm a Christian. He uses stories and analogies to effectively communicate a message. Sometimes, people listen to what he says, like, what does that mean? And then he unpacks it. You're like, oh, wow, that is actually profound, to use a real life example to send home that type of a message. And so the ability to use examples, anecdotes, real life experiences that people can relate to convey a complex idea is very, very effective. And when you watch speakers, you start seeing certain things that they do when they speak, whether it's intonations and playing with vocal variety, whether it is alliterations and how they construct their sentences, how they shift from something that is very exciting and suddenly they are speaking about the lives lost during COVID and how painful it was. Because as we sit here, you remember, you know someone who lost their life to COVID-19. I was mentioning how these conversations for us started when it was during the COVID era, but there are lives that were lost. People who would have loved to be able to call right now, who, if I dial their number, they can't answer. And that is sad. And those are some of the things we live with. But as you think about those people, just realize what I've done to you. I've literally taken you to a place. I've taken you to a person that has a deep connection with you. And I don't even know that person, but I've literally transported you to that experience. You almost, that sadness, you could almost feel it dawn on you of loss, that mourn, that sense of, I can't have this person or that interaction anymore. And that is the power of public speaking and be intentional about it. So you learn that when you study great speakers, read books about it, think about it, and be intentional. Also bring energy when you're actually giving it. It shouldn't just be, let's just get it over and done with, right? So that is on the do it intentionally. So you do it regularly, you do it intentionally. And then thirdly, do it reflectively. These are those points about recording yourself, right? Take notes, identify things that you may have not done as well. Ask for feedback. You'll be surprised how certain small things that other people pick up on can drastically improve your effectiveness. It is when you improve these small little things over time that the effect becomes compounded. And all of a sudden, I have people who listen to some of my talks and they're like, how did you become such a great speaker? Were you born this way? Did you listen to what I was saying or how I spoke 10 years back? You probably wouldn't even dare. You'll be like, hey, get him off the stage. Who staging this one? Who's your brother who has given this tender? Because you should not be here. You know, that is the thing. But because I was deliberate and intentional over a long period of time, and I've been in the public speaking arena over 18 years now, from when I was intentional in those years in school to develop and grow, putting myself in debating setups. And I started learning certain things about how I communicate, and I've been improving them incrementally over time. And someone will look at me now and they'll be like, I just want to be like that overnight. It doesn't happen like that. But you actually will start seeing the improvement over time. And so that's why it is critical for you to do it reflectively. So start reflecting on how you have been speaking. What are some of the things that you know are your limitations? Monitor them over time. Have people who can walk that journey with you. So going into speaking clubs helps with that. You'll have, for example, a Toastmasters environment. I haven't even been in Toastmasters for like 2 years now. So in case you felt like, hey, this guy is doing free ads for Toastmasters, I don't benefit, okay? Maybe I must actually send them an invoice because as Melody said at the beginning, there's no such thing as free master classes. But get something, someone, some context that will give you feedback because that's going to help you to improve for you. There are general points that I can speak about here, like I'm doing now, that might not even be applicable for you. For some of you, you already have the content. It is just how you package it. For some of you, you have no content, but you know how to package it, right? So you need to know your area and focus on that. And that is where the reflection helps. So record yourself. If you can't get a video recording, your phone has a voice memo. At a minimum, has a voice memo. You'll be surprised. Some of the stuff that you record yourself doing becomes so powerful in impacting many lives. Some of the videos that I've recorded or clips that I've recorded, I've been able to use them to inspire people. I mean, I remember I was doing a talk in a place in Bushbuck Ridge, actually. That's how I've connected with Harold. And one of the times when I was doing those talks there, I was encouraging people to be the best of themselves. And I was saying that's what really matters. And how I packaged it came out so well that many people found it so inspirational, but it was because I recorded it. And so I started sharing it on WhatsApp. People are like, yo. Do you have the full recording? I would say, be you, but the best you. You can be like Oprah Winfrey. But what I'm asking you to do is just to be you. The only catch is be the best you. You can be like Bill Gates. Make all the money that Bill Gates has made. But all I'm asking you to do is just to be you, but the best you. And that's just how it came out. And because I recorded it, I can even myself relive it, replay it, like that, if Ndu, is it Ndu, Kabelo from TKZ, he's a pastor now, but hey, if you tempt him with that microphone, that TKZ song can come out and hey, you will dance because, you knew it from back then because it was recorded. So there's power in being able to record yourself over and above your improvements. There's certain things that it will help you with over time. So I'm going to pause there before I go into a few other areas of tips that I'm going to share from what I've prepared. I just want to see what people are putting in the comments. And maybe if you have something that you want to verbalize as a question, you're most welcome to raise your hand and Lizzie will recognize you.
Raise your hand and be you, the best you.
Exactly, be you. You can be like Melizzi, but the charge is simple. Be you. The only catch is be the best you. So we're not going to have time for me to play any clips here, but I'm going to touch on a few things.
There's a hand.
Okay, let's go for the hand. Yes, let's go for the hand. Let's see Helga.
Good evening. I hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear, Helga.
Thank you. During the presentation, how do you remember your cues without looking at them? If maybe you've prepared, let's say, a 5 minutes presentation, and you're not supposed to be looking at your cue cards, how do you remember what is following and the details of what you're saying? Thank you.
You just pray and trust in the Lord. I'm joking. Okay, so the reality is that's one of the areas of anxiety. So, and that's where I encourage people because that's what I do. You don't want to memorize too much. You want to know the gist of your talk, right? Know the gist of your talk and focus on that. And there's a bridge that allows you to account for both. So you can be purely having no notes, rather, have no cues, and you're just giving your talk. The other side is you can have notes, but if you want to have notes, the best way to go about it is use rather a presentation format like slides. And with slides, the moment you start writing sentences, you are going down the wrong track, right? It's down the wrong path. We don't have time to cover presenting and doing your public speaking through notes, but you can't be putting all of what you need to say there. But that can be a form of giving you cues. And that makes it easier for you to say, okay, now I'm in this section. But overall, your speech has three primary parts, right? It's the opening, it's the main body of your speech, and it's the closing. What I would encourage you to do, especially depending on the magnitude of your talk, memorize your opening, memorize your closing. Those need to be quite punchy, catchy, and succinctly capture your message, and particularly your opening, because that's what grabs the audience's attention. I don't have time to give you examples of openings, but openings can be like a shocking statistic. Do you know 8 out of 10 people would rather die than give a talk? Everyone is listening now. You got there. It can be a powerful quote from Aristotle. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but it's a habit." You grab people's attention. So it's a variety of things that you can do. A story, opening up with a story. I opened up with a story when I was allowing people to think of questions they can ask. A story is captivating. We just love stories. People love stories. That's why the box office is always, Hollywood is always making money. We love stories because it allows us to live an alternative reality. It takes our minds and pushes it into a realm where it's different and I can touch and feel what someone else has done, has said. what it might have felt like to be that person, you know, and that is very important to bring people along. And that's why stories allow you to do that. And in fact, when you tell stories, it's easy to remember what you're going to say. It's your story, right? You tell it like how you tell it. There's no, you must start with this word, finish with that word. It is just a story. You know, I woke up one day, this happened. You just tell it. It's conversation. But then, now I'm going to give advice for two types of people because we vary as people. If you are a person who gets a lot more comfort in being extremely prepared, you have written out your speech, I would say write out your speech fully as you would and how you want to say it. And then try to memorize it. You're going to get a big part of your speech. Once you've memorized it, well, maybe let me take one step back before the two types of people. Your speech will have those three main parts: your opening, your body, and your closing. Memorize your opening, memorize your closing. They should be punchy. They're going to be very, very long. But by memorize, I also don't mean word for word. Just know how you can say it and regurgitate it or rehearse it so that it's easy for you to say it. So for example, if now suddenly people are like, you have 1 minute, you want to be able to jump into a closing that is punchy. And then when you look at the body of your presentation, these ideas that we call, things that are stated in triads, in threes, are easy for people to remember, including yourself, right? So if you have your speech and you can have, for example, grouped ideas in three that I'm going to tell you guys about public speaking. Maybe I'm going to start with Q&A. Then maybe I will go into some theory. Then if we have time, we will do some clips and some videos as an example. It is very easy for me to remember how I'm going to run the session because those are fairly easy things. And then when I go in there, you can then have subpoints in themselves that are triads. But because you would have rehearsed it, you know exactly what you want to say. But you don't have to go into too much detail. You might just have the main crux of your speech where you memorize the outline and what the key points are. You would have constructed it. It becomes easier. And then because the two types of personalities, if you are the person who has written it out, you will rehearse it. But what's going to happen is that you'll realize as you regurgitate and replay the speech that you forget sections. Now, because you've structured it in parts, most importantly, remember I would call it headings. So that because you have read your speech multiple times, you rehearsed it multiple times, you will always be able to say something to each of those headings. And that is more important than saying exactly how it was. Okay, so that's how you do it. Now, then it tells you the other extreme. For me, I rarely write down speeches. Sometimes it's maybe a bit of laziness and trying to rely on what I know I am able to do. But also the other side is that it helps me with flexibility. I will be intentional about certain parts of my speech that I want them to be punchy. It has to come out this way. It's a this way or nothing, right? So I was doing, for example, a talk at TEDx. I was giving TEDx at the Riversense TEDx. It was at a very rough time in my life. I didn't even have time. These guys say you need to prepare your speech, memorize it. And I was like, I will not have time to write the speech. I don't even write speeches, right? So I had to find time to write the speech and I was late. I almost pulled out. Eventually, I got to write something. But now, it was like the night before the presentation that I hadn't even memorized it. I had not even given this talk as a rehearsed talk. But because that's how I do speeches, when I was writing it, I was rehearsing certain parts of it to ensure that I know what I want to say. But what I knew is that there are key points in my speech that I'm going to be speaking about. And those allowed me to put subsections, and it became easier for me to remember. There are certain things in the speech that I didn't say, partly because of time, partly because, I forgot it. But no one knows because they didn't read my speech. It'll only be maybe the organizers because on the last day they insisted I must send them the speech. They're like, hey, Katlego, you cheated us. Where was the section? But that is the important part. So what I then did is because in the preparation, I am saying certain things and I say how I want them to come out. I start learning the main message around how I want to deliver the talk. For example, I'll give you this example. When I opened that talk at TEDx, one of the things was to use a story, my personal story, to connect with the audience. But in the story, also bring in a light dash of humor, because humor brings people in, right? And so, I used two forms of humor. I'll just give those two examples. The one was, it is always useful as a speaker to get into the context of where you're speaking and to be almost breathe the things that the people that you're going to be speaking to are breathing and feel the things that the people you're speaking to are feeling. So coming in early is very important. Get the context. Even if you're speaking at 10 o'clock, the sessions start starting at 8 o'clock, come in early. So when I got to this venue, I was wearing a suit and my goodness. Oh, sorry, I came in actually just wearing a shirt and it was warm. But when they said, go, let's start the presentations for the TEDx, suddenly someone is pumping these aircons and I'm freezing. Like I was freezing. I could not believe it. And then now the whole day it was like that. And when my speech came, I said, this place, I'm just now paraphrasing because I can't remember exactly how I worded it. It doesn't really matter. I said to the guys, like, you know what, this is amazing. I came into this auditorium knowing that I'm coming to Africa. But when we sat down and the session started, I suddenly was in Antarctica because of how cold it is, right? And people were feeling the cold, and so they could react to that. It was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I've been feeling. Who on earth set these echoes? So that's the one side of it. And then when I say sharing my story, which was the opening, and the openings are easy because it's a story and also it's humor. It's easier to remember. So I told these guys, I come from a township called Leboagomo. It's actually very misleading that it's called a township because it's not a town and there are certainly no ships there, right? Maybe the only ships are hardships, but that's just about it. So I gave them the story of my life, but with humor, okay? And so that was an easy thing for me to remember because it was a story, but it was also humorous. And then I could go into the sections that I've prepared. And I didn't need to remember the words that I used, but more or less the construct of what I wanted to say. Some of the sentences I'll remember, but not exactly like that. It was more the message. And then it also makes your speech feel natural. When you forget something, continue. You know what you're talking about. You know the gist of your message. It might even be where you forget something. Take a pause and say, let's recap on what I've told you, right? Nobody knows that you are saying that to help yourself remember the next point. And then take a pause. Okay. So that will help you with just the memorization aspect. But the more you rehearse, the more you will actually be able to remember your speeches. In fact, with formal, with the TED Talks and the TED speakers, most of them, you'll find out they finished their speeches 5 months before the TED event that year. They memorized it and gave it, I don't know, for months before they actually gave it at the TED stage, on the TED stage. And so that the time you're looking at the TED Talk, it is so refined because this person has given it, tens and tens and tens of times, having at some times need to remember or remind themselves using cue notes, but over time they remembered, okay, this is what I say. And so that's one thing that you can incorporate. But when you don't have time, you do a bit of a mix of both. Improvisation is healthy and it actually is very helpful. Okay, so maybe I'll close out with some quick pointers because our time is up. But I just want to see if there might be any critical questions to what I've addressed. Doesn't look like it. Okay, so Mtembedi has helped us to remember through the modern artist, Jay-Z saying, it's grand opening, grand closing. So those are important. So Aristotle says there are 3 pillars of persuasion. Now I'm going to touch on these and then I'll give you a few quick fire tips. And those are ethos, pathos, logos. Pronunciation, you can go and correct me. I'm not a Greek scholar, but ethos has to do with your credibility and character. Do not underestimate that. When you are going to speak, you want to ensure that people recognize you for who you are. I'll give you an example. There are some places where I go to speak and I will give them my profile and bio. They don't read it. They're like, oh, this bio, this person is so well achieved. I'm not going to even try to read their bio. I'm just going to allow them to speak. Disaster. Because these people are not convinced. Like, why is he so well achieved? Are you just saying that to convince us because you invited the speaker? But when they read those accolades, like for example, when I'm going to speak with high scholars, I bring out my matric results. I don't need my university results. They might see those fails there and there, but I bring out the high school ones, the ones that I know, they will not find a blemish. I'll say, I got these results. I got 79% for physical science, 79% for life orientation. And then the rest were distinctions. And then with those distinctions, I got 99% for mathematics. And I put it as the last result there. Because these kids will be like, you. By the time I get to that stage, I can say anything. Like I can say anything. It's very important because you need to understand that when someone introduces me and say, hey, this guy is a public speaker and he's accomplished. Now I get this to the stage. You're like, okay, many people are said to be like that. But if someone says, hey, this guy has been giving talks on at 2 of the top 4 banks in South Africa, giving keynotes there. He has spoken on radio, on Metro FM. He has spoken on Business Day TV. He has spoken on Newsroom Africa. Hey, yeah, like, hey, even the people start sitting properly. Hey, what is this guy going to say? Right? It's the credibility aspect of it. So don't shoot yourself in the foot when you have to provide your bio, right? The only time that you really must put yourself out there is in the bio. You must write it like, there's never been a person who has lived like Lizzie, right? There's never been a person who has lived like Becky, never been a person who has lived like Magnet. When that bio is read, when they read it, you do that pretending to be humble. You're like, hey, I can't even believe you are reading that. Hey, you wrote it very well. Holding that pen, that's important because it establishes your credibility and people then afford you automatic attention. And they, instead of saying, no, you're speaking nonsense, they're like, hey, where is he going with this one, right? So those are the benefits you start getting when people give you credibility. I'm going to jump out of that because there's a lot, but I can't cover everything. And the second one is pathos. So that's about emotional bond with your listeners, building rapport, right? So using stories. If you talk about your mom, most of us can relate to that. Even if I've lost my mom, I can relate emotionally because I remember that I've lost my mom. Maybe I didn't even grow up with my mom, but most of us have grown up with our moms. We have this very strong affection and relationship with our mothers. They've protected us. They've been there for us. They've sacrificed for us, etc., etc. So the moment you speak about your mom or about an experience with your mom, it connects with the audience. When you tell a story, it allows people to step into your shoes. When it's an emotional story, all the more. And so connecting with the audience is critical. Showing empathy, that you can sympathize, that you can understand, that you can relate. You're going to give a talk and a natural disaster has just happened. Acknowledge it. Ask for a moment of silence. It just brings people into your corner. They're like, no, you are one of us. You understand. You're going to speak to an audience, they've been struggling with mathematics. Don't just come and hit. Solving for X is easy. No, start with your struggles. I struggled with solving for X. I struggled with this. But I found that in my struggles, the more I rose up after I've fallen, the more I got better, the more I started to understand, the more I started peeling the onion of understanding. You're starting to relate with them. They start opening up to you. You can start lending your messages a lot more. So emotions are very useful. The use of analogies, metaphors, emotionally charged words, encouraging words, that is very impactful, speaking from the heart. And then logos is around logical and rational arguments. So I can tell you now that, for example, for a public speaking standpoint, you don't want to be too excessive and too frantic with your gestures because that's becoming a distraction. It takes people's attention away from people are wondering, hey, Mara, just slow down, Katlego. You're dancing now. What's going on? Like, I can't even listen. So there's logic to what I'm saying. Someone can connect intellectually to the rationale of the point that I'm putting forward, right? And that is what is important around it, where you bring logic to why something you're proposing makes sense. You bring evidence, you use statistics, you reference people who have done something of that nature. So that is critical and it is absolutely important. Now, let me go into the quick fire notes. I'm going to ask for maybe 3 minutes from Melise because I know, hey, my time is up. My time is up. Another thing is you must be punctual as a public speaker. It was a big pressure point because I was like, I want to say this point. 2058, I was like, join. I was trying to join the call. Zoom, open now because I can't have the right to say to these guys, be on time. I was late. That was a close call, but I made it on time. Okay, I made it on time. So some quick fire points. So know your audience. Audience is critical if you're going to be speaking. Knowing your audience helps you, and you need to know it well before in your preparation. Some words you should not even use at all. If you're going to be speaking to high school students, what is the point of using corporate lingo? If you're going to be speaking to a corporate audience, you don't use church lingo. For example, those sort of things. If you're speaking to church audience, you don't use world lingo. I mean, we will just say, onyaka Jesu. When we are listening to you using terminology, referring to God as Sky Daddy and referring to ancestors as the underground gang, we'll be like, no, slow down, slow down. Okay, so know your audience. Know the size of your audience, know the demographical mix of your audience, the ages, because the ages tell you what they will be willing to tolerate and what they won't be willing to tolerate. The racial dynamics, the demographic dynamics, the context from which they are coming, their educational background, because some jokes are too intellectually heavy that if you don't have a heavily intellectual audience, you're going to struggle with lending the joke. Know the language of your audience. I might be a petty speaker, in fact, wasting my time here, only to find out all the guys and the ladies on this call are Sepedi speakers. Maybe I would have even been a lot more effective. This whole presentation, so it just allows me to learn if I knew that. So that's knowing your audience. Know your setting. The auditorium. Is it an auditorium? Is it an open space? Is it a lecture hall? Is it a tiny meeting room? Because when you have that appreciation, you'll realize, no, this example that I want to do, I won't have enough space because the stage is going to be too tiny, or the audience are going to be too far from me, so this will not necessarily work. Am I going to have a projection facility or not? Will there be a microphone? Will there be a speaker? What kind of microphone? Even that is important, because if the microphone is handheld, now suddenly you have one less arm to play around with, right? Because the other one has to keep the microphone here. So if you had you'd been planning to do these gestures, now you need to maybe prepare one-sided. Those sort of things, they change the dynamics, right? What kind of audience is it? Is it an online audience? A bit different. You need to be in a setting where your internet connectivity is stable. You're not going to be easily disturbed. The background is not distracting. Is it a hybrid audience? So that if it's hybrid, you need to maintain eye contact both with the audience in the room, but also with the camera now and then, and to help bring those guys who are online into the call. Okay? And then sometimes ask the question, can I make the setting better? So oftentimes with many talks that I've done, like if I'm running a panel discussion, I go in, I even change the setup. It's like one chair is there, one chair is there, one chair is here. I'm like, hi guys, this is a conversation. Let's arc the chairs so that it looks like we're all leaning in and speaking to each other. Those sort of things, small things, but they change the dynamic because I knew about it. I could already preempt it and set it up properly. Okay, and then know your boundaries and limits. What time do I start? I already know, some people are already logging off because they're like, this one is not serious. He thinks already he can come to these, the Rising Girl Child sessions and just run over because he thinks already this public speaking is so important. It's 9 o'clock. We have contracted to 9 o'clock. This is it. So know the boundaries. I know the boundary.
In South Africa, load shedding will also help you keep your times, right? Like
exactly.
It
exactly. Precisely. So know your boundaries. How long am I going to be speaking for? How much time do I have for questions? How much time do they have for the venue? And then know your worth. I've already touched on this a little bit. Don't allow people to mistreat you, not introducing you properly, making snarky comments about you. I address things very quickly when you are coming on stage. Sometimes when someone doesn't read my bio properly and they just say, yeah, this person is an actuary, this person has spoken here, and they leave it there. I come and then I'll just reread the bio. Okay, I'm like, okay, let me just read your bio just to give you the context, because the way you've written it allows the message to land a lot more powerfully. Okay. And then always have a backup of your speech, especially if you've written it down or you're going to be referring to notes. Have it printed out somewhere, especially if you have a presentation. Have it, on a cloud. Put it on, Gmail and Google Cloud. Put it on Microsoft Azure. Maybe it is a Microsoft account. Even, go and bring in AWS. You never know when these clouds start raining. So if it rains on one cloud, you have the other cloud to run to and get extract your file. So have backups. Have it on your USB. Have it on your machine. Have it online somewhere. So I generally do that to ensure that if I need to then present, I'm not stuck because the place that I go to can't take a flash disk. and then there's no connectivity or whatever. Just having it in multiple spaces helps you. Rehearse your speech, I've touched on. Identify the key dial movers, I've touched on. This is identifying those critical areas. I'll say, there's 2-3 big areas that you can start with from a public speaking standpoint that are going to significantly improve you as a public speaker. I've spoken to the structure of your speech, the content. Make it punchy from an opening standpoint, impactful closing, memorize both, signpost where you can. It keeps the audience attention because they know what is coming. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell it. Sometimes you might even want to tell them what you've told them. Use the power of threes, as they call it, those tri-8s. Connect with stories in your content, in your speech. Use stories, use anecdotes. It makes you human. Use quotations. It just changes the dynamic. Quotations are powerful because someone thought of a brilliant way of saying something in a sentence, and that's the power of quotations. Use statistics. Maintain eye contact with your audience. It's a difficult one at the beginning, but learn to do it. When you're speaking online, look into the camera rather than necessarily on the screen. Sometimes it makes you look like you're looking down. So you can look into the camera and it gets you that good eye contact. Be intentional about your body language. Use body language. Don't just be a statue, but also watch where you might be overusing it. Tone, don't be monotone. Use pauses. I think this maybe is the last one that I'll focus on. Use pauses. There's a lot more there. There's a lot of wealth you're going to achieve from a public speaking standpoint if you can effectively use pauses. It allows you to think. Right? So when you're pausing, you know what I can say next. I know what I can say next, rather than just keeping on mumbling about and not really going anywhere. And then bring the audience in. Be intentional about engaging the audience. Ask them questions. Speak to them during and before the session that you're going to be speaking to. Address recent events and whatever might have been happening in current affairs. It just brings you in from that standpoint. So I think I'll close it there and then hand over to Lizzie. And if there's any other questions that you might want answered, Lizzie, either for yourself or from the audience.
It is evident we're going to have to do this again to go through what we went through and make sure that we get it right. We are going to take ourselves videos now and review and come back and review the notes. So I am very sure that we might need to do this again. So twist your arm again. But thank you so much. I can't believe I've been in multiple sessions with you and I'm still having notes, writing notes, trying both to take notes for everyone and myself. I'll definitely go back to this recording. So thank you so much. I don't even want to add or remove from what we have shared. And yeah, so the feedback has also been great. Kaiser, they say, loved how you chopped it all up, Mr. Thaba. There was actually a question from Letabo asking about a persona, if there's a certain persona required for public speaking. But when you then said, be the best you, she felt answered in that one. I hope I haven't closed anyone or any of the comments, but this has been a very great session. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think we will definitely have to do it again. I want to release people so that we are punctual and we keep to our times, but also very, thank you so much. I see Becky has a hand and I'm going to allow him into closing us out, but thank you so much for attending, everybody. This has been really great. And thank you, Ntate Thaba, for always pouring into this platform of ours whenever we are asking. Definitely asking you again for this one. Hi, Becky.
Thank you so much. No, I firstly thank you so much, Mr. T, for the session. Really well packaged, and in terms of the pointers, I think anyone who is not into public speaking and they're in the session, they can have a lot of takeaways for self-application. So I just wanted to ask if we can make the link, the recording available for people to be able to, those who want to go back and just rewatch the session and start practicing on their own.
This is where the money
From a
side comes
practical
in.
point. Thanks.
Yeah, this is where I said there's nothing for free, so we will distribute it 10 US dollars per link. No, Melizzy, I'm sure
Thanks.
she will avail. Melizzy, maybe address that one. That's for you, not for me.
Becky, welcome
Thank
to
you,
the
sir.
family. You will know that recordings are coming, but they are coming. We'll definitely share the recording. We have recorded and we will definitely share. We'll prioritize sharing it as well. Please follow me on my socials, Liz Morale. Oh, I'm that girl now. Liz Morale on Instagram, because when it's ready, I will definitely send a link there, Becky, if we are not connected there, or on LinkedIn as well. Thank you, everybody. I see Nanda Paul's incredibly insightful and engaging. Thank you, Mary Ann. Great session. Becky, thank you. And I've seen a lot of, I know Morgan also commented there, but let's call it a night. Whatever, we took a lot of notes tonight. Let's not do too many things at once. Let's just take it. Let's go review it. I'll definitely, for this one also, because it was one where we just wanted to share this the tips and the lessons and the learning. We will prioritize sharing the recording so that you can take one or two things for yourselves that you can then implement in, you know, when you are doing the lobola negotiations and stuff there, that you remember to count the filler words, the M's and the, that could be a tough one, but yeah, without going back. I think I will allow us to dial off. Good night, family. And those that want to hang out, you can do that. For 5 minutes, we're going to release Ntate Thaba. You can see he's still in work mode, so we're not going to keep him for long. So I'm going to allow everybody to unmute themselves. Okay. Can unmute Ntate Thaba. Maybe you can try to unmute yourself. Let me see if what I did works.
Yep.
Cool.
Succeeded. Thank you.
Thank you. As you can engage while I switch off the recording.
Thank you for joining, everyone. We appreciate your presence.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Helga.